Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be talking about the Atlanta Regionals, which just wrapped up this past weekend. A lot of exciting things happened. It was really cool to get to see the post-rotation format, even though I am kind of sad that we lost a few decks. But, you know, we're post-rotation now. We're talking about the new decks here, even though, you know, one of the older decks did manage to dominate, that of course being Dragapult, which is all over this, you know, placings right here. So that is obviously the deck that kind of dominated the most, but overall it was Gardevoir that ended up winning the event. But more specifically today, I want to kind of talk about some of the decks that didn't do so well. Now, obviously the regional just wrapped up. You know, pretty much everybody that watched the regional kind of got to see some of the decks that performed really well, but a lot of people don't really talk about the decks that underperformed, or maybe kind of why they underperformed. So kind of want to break it down and talk about some of the decks going into this tournament that, you know, some people might have thought would do kind of okay or kind of good, but ultimately they just did really bad overall. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like it, and you might as well just subscribe too, so that'd be cool. But yes, as I mentioned, obviously Dragapult kind of dominated this event. I do think there was like, I think I saw 17 total Dragapults in top 32, something crazy like that. I mean, you can see right here, just looking at the screen, like it's just all Dragapult. So Dragapult was obviously the clear, you know, popular deck that obviously did very well at this event. Surprisingly, with Gardevoir, maybe not surprisingly, but Gardevoir is one of those decks. It's kind of always been like that, I feel like, where not that many people pick it for like day one, but it converts to day two very well. It's kind of like a high skill deck. A lot of top players play the deck, and you know, the top players that do play the deck end up doing really well with it. Obviously in this case winning the entire tournament, which by the way, that final set was, you know, absolutely crazy. Highly recommend you check it out if you haven't watched it yet. Just a really good game 3 series going down to time, which is kind of insane considering how much time is on the clock, but when you see what happens, it just kind of makes sense. Obviously we have a couple of surprises here, you know, towards the top. The Flareon box, another deck that was kind of interesting leading up to this regional, I would say. This is kind of a deck that we've sort of seen, you know, not be super popular necessarily, but it's done pretty well. The Sylveon EX being a very annoying card. I personally hate this card. It's very annoying to deal with, but honestly it's a really good meta call, I feel like, especially when you consider the fact that, you know, Dragapult's kind of dominating, Gardevoir's kind of dominating. You have that Angelite attack to go ahead and shuffle 2 bench Pokemon back into the deck, so it can kind of really slow opponents down and kind of just disrupt their whole game plan. It can be very difficult to kind of set up a Dragapult, so if you manage to, you know, send a Dragapult back into the deck, and then like a Dracloak for example, it can kind of really mess up your game plan. So I'm actually not really surprised to see that we did have one of these in top 16. This, in my opinion, is kind of an overachievement for the deck. This is a deck that I think is actually pretty decent, but again, we just haven't seen it played too much. You know, we haven't seen the results yet, obviously, because rotation just happened. So I do kind of expect this type of deck to kind of get a little bit more popular in the future. And again, before we talk about the bad decks or the decks that underperform, I'm just kind of pointing out some of the things that I kind of noticed at the top of the I keep wanting to say bracket. I don't know why I keep saying that. At the top of the results here, yeah. Goldango, kind of another surprise for me. This is one that I mean, it didn't really underperform, but I kind of expected to see like a little bit more, like at least one in top 8. Obviously we have 2 right here, kind of right outside of top 8. I am kind of surprised to see that we didn't have any in top 8 though. Again, right there outside of top 8, obviously. But again, Goldango is just a deck that I feel like lately has really been popping off. I'm kind of surprised to not see it in top 8. What I will say about Goldango is I think it's really interesting and really cool to see all the different builds of Goldango. You know, we've been seeing kind of the Dragapult variants, just the kind of standard Goldango, you know, Goldango to Dunsparce, that's another option. So there's a lot of different options here, you know, some of them kind of more focused on draw power. I guess really if you think about it, the Dragapult, you know, version of this is also kind of focused on draw power, just because you have Dracloak as well. So it's just kind of like finding that, you know, perfect partner with Goldango. Finding a couple extra things you can kind of do here and there by adding a Monkey Dory, since you're playing all these types of energies. I think that Goldango is a deck that is still kind of being experimented with. There's no clear like best build of this yet, so it's really kind of cool to see all the different variants do, you know, pretty well overall, I would say. Just none of them kind of peaking into top 8. And the last deck I wanted to kind of mention as an overachieving deck, in my opinion, which is very exciting to see, is Charizard in 37th place. Shout out to Brian Wade right here. This is a deck right here. You know, obviously Charizard in the past has been very dominant, but it's no secret that once Badoo dropped, Charizard kind of fell off the face of the earth. Kind of hard to deal with Badoo. You're relying on a lot of different item cards, you know, rare candy especially, to kind of get going here. But right here is kind of an interesting build overall. So we do have like the Charizard. We have the 4-1-2 line of Charizard. We are running the Pidgeot here, looks like, but also the Dunsparce is like some additional draw power, which I think makes a lot of sense. You know, you can kind of get your Dunsparces out early. If you're dealing with Badoo, you know, you can kind of look for the Jacq, get the Dunsparces going, and start drawing cards faster. This build also does run the Dusclops line, so, you know, that's kind of, you know, pretty standard with Charizard. Although, I will say, like, post-rotation, I haven't really seen too many Charizard builds. The only one I've kind of seen is, like, the Charizard with Noctowl and, like, Terapagos, like, Briar kind of combo. So this kind of Pidgeot variants that, you know, Charizard used to run with, I feel like I haven't seen that much. So to me, this is a very interesting build. We do also have the Klefki right here to kind of shut down abilities, and also the Chi-Yu, very interesting card right here as well. Ace spec of choice looks to be Grand Tree, which is a card that makes sense for this deck. Kind of another way to just get around Badoo. I feel like that's kind of the reason why they're playing this specifically, just because Badoo is just everywhere right now. And then also like the TM Evo, another option to evolve stuff, also the rare candies. So that's kind of what I like about this build right here specifically, is you kind of have all these different ways to kind of get around Badoo, depending on what you need to do. That's all good and great. Those are some of the decks that I just wanted to kind of quickly shout out as you know, decks that kind of overachieved a little bit, or I guess I kind of talked about some that underachieved as well. But let's go ahead and talk about the decks that really underachieved in my opinion. This right here is kind of the meta breakdown. This right here is the overall meta breakdown for the entire event, including day 1 and day 2. Obviously right here you can see that Raging Bolt was actually the most popular deck, beating out Dragapult by, you know, 5 people. So pretty much, you know, a lot of people kind of expected Raging Bolt to be popular. It's just one of those decks that I feel like is very popular in general. You know, pretty easy to pilot. You know, obviously every deck has its nuances, but I do feel like if you're a newer player, you know, a deck like Raging Bolt makes a lot of sense to go ahead and pick up. It's pretty simple to understand, you know, how to win the game with Raging Bolt. So it just kind of makes sense that it's very popular. And I guess technically if you include like the other variants of Dragapult, then Dragapult is probably just the most popular deck. I just saw right here, we have, you know, straight Dragapult right here with no Dusknoir at 125 people. So I'm pretty sure Dragapult is technically the most popular deck, but still Raging Bolt obviously has a lot of people playing it too. Now scrolling down a little bit further here, we'll kind of see, well, first off, we'll kind of see some decks that like nobody really played here. Shout out to the Great Tusk, actually. I was watching the stream. We did have Great Tusk Mill on the stream. Unfortunately, they lost. But I was very excited to see this. And looks like they were 2 wins away from making day 2. So honestly, you know, pretty impressive. But yeah, obviously we have some, you know, meme decks that aren't really decks that don't really exist down here. We even have some though that like, you know, kind of exists, and they kind of did pretty good actually, like Conkeldurr, 1 win away from day 2. Actually very impressive in my opinion, losing to looks like Goldango, Dragapult, and then probably Terrabox. This is a fantastic deck, not gonna lie. I'm actually a big fan of Conkeldurr. This is a really fun deck if you guys have not played that yet, but I'm getting sidetracked. Yeah, obviously down here we have the decks that are kind of like meme decks that, you know, nobody really plays. But as we scroll up, we see some decks that, you know, had some high hopes going into the post-rotation format, and unfortunately just kind of didn't show up whatsoever. Starting off with, of course, my boy Feraligatr. Very disappointing results overall. Got a little over 20 players playing it at the events. No players hitting day 2. The best record was 4-3-2. So really nobody even like that close, I would say, to making day 2. The best placing being 858th. So kind of unfortunate to see. Like, it's kind of crazy to think that over in Japan, in pretty much this exact format, this deck managed to win the entire event, and then in Atlanta there's not a single one you know, player that actually managed to make day 2 with this deck. And I mean, when you kind of think about it, it kind of just makes sense as to why this deck didn't do that great. Kind of looking at our meta compared to like Japan, for example, going into the Champions League, this was a deck that I feel like caught a lot of people off guard. The ability to kind of retreat lock people, the ability to just kind of spread damage, to do big damage with Feraligatr, just kind of the one prizer deck. It's just something that a lot of people probably weren't expecting overall at the event. It was also a best of one format, you know, opposed to best of three that we have over here. And honestly, when you look at the decks that kind of dominated Atlanta, like a lot of them just kind of deal with this deck pretty well. You have decks like Dragapult, for example. You know, obviously things like Mimikyu can wall out Dragapults, but when Mimikyu is sitting on the bench, Dragapult can still spread that damage to Mimikyu and pretty quickly knock it out. And obviously there's different builds of Feraligatr. You know, some people are running kind of the more standard stuff with Milotic and things like that. Then we have other builds like this one running Greninja EX, which is kind of crazy, not gonna lie. But overall, I feel like a lot of people have the tools to kind of prepare for this type of deck, especially when you consider the fact that, you know, the format is it's honestly a little bit slower right now just because of Badoo. So I feel like a lot of decks are kind of built to deal with that. We see some of the decks running Professor's Research that weren't running that before, or other supporter cards to kind of find things that you need that aren't item cards. So we kind of have the tools to get around this like kind of stally, you know, gameplay sort of, to where you're kind of able to find the cards that you need for the specific matchup. Obviously by now most people know what Feraligatr does, so if you do see your opponent flip over a Totodile, you already know like, okay, they can retreat lock me, they can spread damage, you know, this is what I need to do. And so that surprise factor is kind of gone. It is best of three as well, so you just have more tools to kind of deal with things. And honestly, I feel like Dragapult and Gardevoir do pretty decent up against Feraligatr, and again, these are the two decks that kind of dominated this event, so it just makes sense. And it makes me really sad because I was very excited for Feraligatr, at least for it to do decent at one event, but it couldn't even do that. And unfortunately, I feel like this deck is just going to kind of disappear overall. Like, I don't see it getting any better anytime soon, unfortunately. And yeah, I mean, it had its run in Japan, and that's cool, but I don't think it's going to really go anywhere after that, unfortunately. I mean, even when you look at results now in Japan with City Leagues, you know, you see it pop up here and there, but overall, you just kind of don't see it anymore. So again, it's probably a fun deck to play at locals and things like that, or, you know, cups, but I don't really see it having any kind of, you know, top 32, top 64 kind of success. Another deck that was kind of hyped up was Future Hands. This is one that I feel like a lot of people ran into online. This of course is a deck that was popular, you know, a few formats ago. Just being able to, you know, turn 2, amp you very much with Iron Hands, just kind of get the ball rolling and start taking prize cards. You do have the Iron Crowns to go ahead and boost your damage as well on top of that. It's a deck that goes fast, you take prize cards fast, and you kind of just win. Well, unless you're in Atlanta, because nobody won with this deck. Again, nobody made day 2 with this deck. This is one that I think had really, I mean, I guess it had more hope than Feraligatr. I think going into Atlanta, a lot of people already said Feraligatr was going to do bad. Future Hands was one of those decks where, you know, nobody expected this to win the event, but I do feel like it was talked about a little bit more. And I mean, yeah, the build is very, very basic. Like, this right here is pretty much what Future Hands looked like back in the day. You know, Pheasantippies here's now, and, you know, we do have some other cards here, I guess, but I mean, do we really actually, like, this is very basic. Like, it's very simple game plan here, right? You go ahead and put Miraidon down, you go ahead and you peak acceleration, you go ahead and attach those energies, you start hitting electric generators, you get your town store down, get all your tool cards out, and you just kind of win after that. But again, with a deck like this, I feel like the game plan is very straightforward. Your win condition is very linear. Your win condition is to win with Iron Hands. Like, there's really not much else to it. You do have one psychic energy in the deck. Aside from that, it's all electric energy. You're just swinging with Iron Hands, trying to do big damage with, you know, amp you very much, with arm press, with the boosted damage, and that's just kind of the whole game plan. And again, while that does work against a lot of people, and in a lot of matchups, it is very linear, it's very predictable, and again, in best of 3, it's kind of just easy to deal with depending on the deck that you're playing. But even in matchups against like Dragapult, for example, let's say you get an early amp you very much, and you take up, you know, 2 prize cards. Pretty much once that Dragapult player gets set up, they can pretty quickly deal with you, and there's not much else you can kind of do about it. Just looking at the cards, I feel like the numbers kind of just work out well to where you can just spread damage with Dragapult and just take multiple prizes against this deck and kind of just destroy them after that. Unfair Stamp feels pretty brutal against this deck. Even item lock seems annoying to deal with because you can't get those electric generators off. So again, this is a deck that didn't have too high expectations, but still overall pretty disappointing to not see anybody make day 2. Especially when you consider the fact that some other decks like Slow King, for example, had 2 players make day 2. Mammoth Swine had a player make day 2. We also had High Dragon. Well, High Dragon didn't do too good. But we did see a lot of these decks that, you know, Greninja Blaziken, for example. This is like actually a really cool deck that I did see online. There's a lot of decks that, you know, at least had some representation in day 2. So to not see future hands, especially, you know, kind of surprising to me. Another honorable mention for a deck that kind of underperformed, if you want to call it that, is Ceruledge. I think a lot of people have just kind of hated on this deck. It's just very boring. I feel the same exact way about it. This is a deck that does not interest me like at all whatsoever. And I feel like whenever this card came out, a lot of people thought it was going to be pretty decent, but the results just haven't been there. Like at any event, it seems like I don't think we've had any Ceruledge EX deck, you know, perform crazy at any kind of regional. I could be wrong about that. But even here, you know, nobody made day 2. You know, we had one person close. Overall, just a deck that is kind of disappointing, I feel like. You know, the game plan's there. Again, pretty straightforward win condition here. This one, you know, is running the Ogre Pawn, which is very interesting to see. But overall, it's just a deck that has been underperforming and has yet to kind of see that success. But to close this out, there is one deck that I want to talk about here that really underperformed, that a lot of people were kind of expecting to do at least decent. And that, of course, is the Walls deck. The deck that a lot of people, you know, pre-rotation were saying was going to be, you know, dominant in this format. It's going to kind of take over the format. How are we going to deal with this without canceling Cologne? Well, it looks like people dealt with it pretty easily because, again, nobody made day 2. Had a lot of people close to making day 2, but nobody quite made it. And again, this is one of those decks that performed very well in the Champions League, you know, in this format over in Japan. Again, it's a deck that I feel like kind of benefits from that best of 1, from that surprise element. You know, when your opponent flips over one of these cards and sees what they're up against, if they're not prepared for it or if they have the wrong start, it can be very, very brutal to kind of deal with, especially in a best of 1 format. And so again, I do think that best of 3 format here does help this out a lot, or I should say it helps playing against this deck out a lot. And again, when you look at the decks that dominated, a lot of them do kind of have the tools to deal with this deck. Now I will say, for example, this build right here does play Mist Energy, which can be great against Dragapult to kind of prevent that spread damage. But again, Dragapult, you know, if it can get set up pretty quickly, if it can get the Dusknoirs up, the Dusclopses, if you can get a Dragapult up turn 2 with Rare Candy, then you can pretty quickly take apart this deck and kind of spread the damage to where you need to. But even decks like Gardevoir have a lot of tools to kind of get around this. You know, Gardevoir playing cards like Screamtail, Gardevoir itself kind of only getting walled out by Ogre Pawn here, and even some Gardevoir players running the Drifloon build, or, you know, with Monkey Dory, obviously. A lot of the decks that were popular at this event just kind of have the tools to deal with these decks, and a lot of times people are just kind of prepared for it, just knowing what you're up against now. That surprise element is kind of gone, so again, a lot of people were kind of just prepared for this. I'm very surprised to not see anybody make day 2. But I do think that this deck, unlike the other ones that I've talked about, I do think has some potential moving forward. We are still getting new cards like the Crustle over in Japan, which has been, you know, doing very well in these types of decks. So I'm going to go ahead and predict that this deck is going to do a lot better at the next regional, but again, at this one, it was very disappointing. But that's going to be it for this one. Just wanted to talk about a couple different decks, kind of give my thoughts on it. Let me know if you guys kind of enjoy me talking about this type of stuff. I will have this linked in the description below, directly to this kind of meta share breakdown, so you guys can check it out. It's really cool because now you can see everybody's decks that, you know, went to the event, not just day 2. So you can see all kinds of, you know, crazy decks like Tinkaton, for example. You can see all their lists here, so you can kind of just build them in TCG Live and test them out yourself. But yeah, overall, really cool event to watch. Again, highly recommend watching the finals. Really good gameplay over there, and yeah, it was just really cool to see the post-rotation format. I'm excited to try a lot of these decks out. I've really been enjoying a lot of Frostlass personally. So I will be playing some more of that online. We did have one make day 2 at 8-3-2, so you know, we'll take it. 101st place. Well, you love to see it. Yeah, it's gonna be it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.